Okay, good morning. Welcome to everybody. Welcome back. We are continuing, plowing through the Masechet Beitzah. We had a bit of a break and we got back last week, just getting back into it. So we continue. We're closing in on the end of the first parak. We'll have a little bit of a way to go, but we are on Daf Yud Gimel Amud Aleph, end of Daf Yud Bet, beginning of Yud Gimel. It's where we got up to last time, and we saw machloket between Rabbi and Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda related to this question of truma. Right, we saw the Mishnah machloket Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. We won't go through that again. We went through that a number of times. Then we went through it again because we had a break in between. So, but now it should be fresh in all of our minds. But essentially, what we saw and what's important for our purposes now is the distinction that the Gemara made between truma versus other matanot kuna. That truma you can never separate on Yom Tov because you could always have done it before. And then we went through and we saw that there was a case essentially where ultimately you could be chayav for truma on Yom Tov itself. A somewhat obscure case, and the conclusion of the Gemara was, if you have a look about 6-7 lines down at the top of Daf Yud Gimel, it said Elamai truma rov truma. Right, meaning in most cases, right, 99% of cases, you will not be eligible or obligated to separate truma on Yom Tov itself. Would have to be done before. That was at least according to one of the opinions. The point was we saw machloket on this point between Rabbi and Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda, and then machloket related to what happens if a person brings in stalks of grain, right, into the house. So again, we said anytime the chiyuv of Trumot and Masrot kicks in after the Gemar Malacha, once the processing of the food has been completed, whatever that means for different foods, different stages of processing. When it comes to wheat, so it's what's called a Meruach Bakri. Essentially, we have all these stalks of wheat and they've been harvested and they're put together, they're in bundles and they're tied up and the bundles are smoothed out. From that point, that is when you are obligated to separate Trumot and Masrot. Beforehand, you are not obligated. Beforehand, it's not yet called tevel. However, if you're never going to get to that point, if you're never going to smooth out the wheat in these bundles and turn it into flour and make dough, you're just going to snack on the stalks individually. So then, seemingly at that point, you would have to separate truma because that is the gemar melacha. And that was essentially the machloket between Rabbi and Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda, in the sense that Rabbi says you'd be chayav. Rabbi Yossi Bar Rabbi Yehuda says no. The Torah says you have to separate from dagan. It's only called dagan when it's put together in these bundles. If you never do that, so then it would be exempt, right? So that was exactly the machloket. If you bring in the grains into your house, right, and you are not going to put them together in this bundle, would you then is it then called tevel? Are you then required to separate Trumot and Masrot? Rabbi says yes. Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda says no. We then saw a somewhat obscure case where even according to Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda, you would still have to separate. We won't get into that now. That was what the Gemara said. So if we now pick it up just from where we read, we're on Daf Yud Gimel Amud Aleph. We're about 7 lines down from the top, and it says Amar Abaye, 8 lines or 9 lines. Amar Abaye. Machloket b'shibulin aval b'kidniot tivrako asuriyata tivla. Okay, we're going to see 2 different versions of what Abaye said. Abaye essentially is limiting the machloket between Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda and Rabbi, and he says that machloket only applies to shibulim, only applies to grain, to stalks of wheat, but with kitniot it would not. According to the first version, we're going to say that everybody. What Abaye is going to say is that everybody agrees there is no machloket when it comes to kitniot. Is there no machloket that they would be chayiv in truma? Is there no machloket that they would not be chayiv in truma? Those are going to be the 2 versions. So let's do one at a time. So Amar Abaye, machloket b'shibulin. This machloket between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi is regarding shibulin. Aval b'kidniot tivrako asuriyata tivla. He says when it comes to kitniot, now it's a little bit confusing because the word asuriyata means bundles, but essentially the kitniot, the way that they are produced, is that you have small bundles of the beans or the spices or whatever it is, which are brought into the house, right? And then essentially the Gemar Malacha, according to everybody, would be if you take all those bundles together and then it's all beaten together, and from there you're going to get the kitniot out. Or do we say from these little bundles already, from there you need to separate the Trumot and Masrot? So says Abaye, Machlok b'shibulin, aval b'kidniyot tivla kol asriyat tivla. He says no. Already, everybody will agree. I.e., there's no chiddush for Rebbe because Rebbe said it already by shibulim. But even Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda would say, in that case, in the case of kidniyot, you bring in these small bundles into your home. So then you would already have to separate trumot and masrot. That is considered teva, unlike the case of the grain. Okay, so now we have a proof for this. We have a proof for our Mishnah. It says, Leima Masayele. Let's say the following Mishnah proves our point. It's a Mishnah in Masechet, to be found in Masechet Trumot, in 10th parak. So it says, Misha Yula Chavilei Tiltan Shel Teva. Somebody who had bundles of tiltan. Tiltan is a type of kidney. I think they translate it as fenugreek, whatever fenugreek is, but it is a type of spice that you would use. So, Misha Yula Chavilei Tiltan Shel Tevel. We'll just call it tiltan, right? So you had these bundles of tiltan which are tevel, and you hareze kotesh umachashev kama zera yesh bahem umafrish al zera ve'no mafrish al ha'etz. So the Mishnah tells me as follows: it says you would take these tiltan, these bundles that you have, and crush them. You have to crush it. That's how you use the food, and you use it to sweeten use it to give a flavor in the pot, right? It's explained why. We're going to see in a moment why specifically tiltan. And Rashi points out that tiltan is something which, maybe have a look at Rashi. It's a little bit further down on the Amud where we are. Let's just see before. Rashi says, "Machlokes b'shibulin," and he says, "Bahanu hu de patar Rabbi Yossi, the Ruban ledisha ve'en garnan elam b'miruach." Right? When it comes to shibulim, as I said before, there Rabbi Yossi made an exempt because generally speaking, the way a person eats shibulim is that you bring them all together and you thresh them all and you put them in these bundles, and then from there that's how you process it. Aval kitniot says yesh bnei adam habesh ein choftinot an yachad. Many people are not going to take all the kitniot and process them all together. Rather, as much as you need right now for the pot, that's all you're going to do. So that's already considered the Gemara Melacha. And he says tiltan min kitnitu u'me'at notnin b'kdera l'tein tam. That's the point. There was tiltan, you only use a very, very small amount. I guess it's a very strong, it gives a strong flavor. And therefore you only need to use a small amount. So the Mishnah said, right, again, the Mishnah from Trumot, our Gemara, but it's quoting a Mishnah. It said, let's go back up and find the place. Right? Misha Yula Chavelei Tiltan Shel Tevel. Hareze Kotesh. So you crush it up. Umachashev Kama Zera Yesh Bem. And you work out, okay, how much of the seed is there as opposed to of the stalk, of the hard outer casing, whatever it is. Right? Kama Zera Yesh Bem. Umafrish Ala Zera Ve'no Mafrish Ala Etz. You separate. Now, when you calculate the amount of Shumot and Masrot, I'm going to separate. I don't calculate from everything, only from the seed, only from the bit which is essentially meant for food. Okay. Now, why is that a chiddush over here? Because let's just see Rashi again. He says kotesh zera derech dishatan. Right? You crush it. That's why you prepare it for eating. Umachashev me'omed. Right? You estimate how much. Ve'ein mafresh ala etz, says Rashi. You don't separate on the hard bit. Ein tzarech lafresh min hakashim. Ve'afal pi shetam etzor perio shaveh. Even though, when it comes to, the Gemara is going to say it explicitly, when it comes to tiltan, amazingly, the taste of the eitz and the pri, the taste of the seed and the hard bit as well, have the same taste. Nonetheless, lo chivuhu chachamim b'masrot. Chachamim did not obligate that outer part in masrot. Midiktani chavilin shel tiltan. Okay, now here's the point. Why do we bring this Mishnah in the first place? Because it says, the fact that it said chavilin shel tevel, in other words, you have these bundles, and we're saying that these bundles are analogous to the case where it's grains, where you bring in one by one, you bring in these stalks, and you're eating from them. There, Rabbi Yossi said you're patur. But over here, the Mishnah just says stam, you bring in these bundles, and they are tivla, they are tevel, you have to separate the trumot and masrot. So seemingly, why do I need the Mishnah to tell me this? This is all obvious. Well, it's not obvious according to Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda, because he's the one who told me that if it's grains, I would not have to separate Trumot and Masrot. So says the Gemara, my love, Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda. This whole Mishnah is coming to tell me that yes, Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda agrees, unlike before. My love, Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda, De'amar hatam lo tivla, acha tivla. Said in the case of Shibbolin, it's not Teva. Over here, he says it's Teva. So says the Gemara, no, lo Rebbe, it could be that no, this is according to the opinion of Rebbe, right? And Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda still disagrees. Well, the question then, says the Gemara, is like this: I Rebbe, my iria tiltan, afilu shibolin nami. Right? If this Mishnah is just following the opinion of Rebbe and not the opinion of Rabbi Yossi, because they still disagree. So my area tiltan, right? My area, when the Gemara says my area, it means why have you brought me a specific case? You could have learned it from a different case, or you could have brought me something else. And why did it have to mention tiltan? Because if it's Rebbe, it didn't have to mention kitniot. It could have been afilu shibolin nami regarding shibolin. It would have been the same thing. And there you would have said, okay, it's to teach you that you calculate the trumot and masrot, you separate from the stalks, from the actual grain, and not from the chaff. Ella, my Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda. So, but hang on, but the same question that you just asked, if the Mishnah is according to Rebbe, you can ask the same question if the Mishnah is according to Rabbi Yossi. Because now you'll say, so what? You'll tell me, no, it's not Rebbe, it's been of Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda. So then, if it's Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda, you could teach it about, and it was to teach you specifically about tiltan, which is a min kitniot, as opposed to shibolin, which is a type of grain. Well, you could have told me about any type of kitniot. Why specifically tiltan? Right? Lishmain and Shalminei kitniot. The kol sheken tiltan. So say it about any type of kitniot. Now, no, all the more so for tiltan this would be the case, because by tiltan you use even less, right? Meaning there's less of a chiddush in terms of the fact that the small amount, this is considered the gmar melacha of these kitniot. It's less of a chiddush by tiltan than it would be by other kitniot. Why? Because by again, the whole discussion is, since most people are going to eat already from these bundles and are not going to wait and process everything together, so therefore that's why I would be chayiv in trumot and masrot. So if it's a food of which I eat very small amounts, so obviously I'm not going to do the whole processing. I'm just going to use the bundles. I'm going to use the very small amounts. That's the tiltan. So that's according to so why teach me tiltan? Why not just teach me all kitniot? And I'll say obviously tiltan will be included. So says the Gemara, no. Ella tiltan strichale. The Mishnah is to teach you about tiltan, and what is it to teach you? Salka dat zachamina. Ho elvatam etzol pirio shaveh lifrosh nami etzol kamashmalan. Meaning, the point of this Mishnah is not to teach you anything about the fact that when you have bundles, whether you separate trumot or you don't separate trumot. I can't use this as a proof that it's Rebbe, that's Rabbi Yossi, no, that's not the issue. The issue here is specifically related to tiltan, and it's specifically related to the fact that when I separate trumot and masrot from it, I separate only from the zera, from the peri, as we call it, and not from the etz. Not from the art part. Why would you think any differently? It's always the case that I'm going to separate from the edible part of the fruit and not from the unedible part. So yeah, because it has the same taste, you might have thought it's different. You therefore might have thought that you would separate from the eitz as well. Kamash malan, that is not the case. Okay, it's interesting. This whole idea, this whole concept of tama eitz for tama pri is something that comes up that we see in the Sipur Briah, right, in Parshat Bereshit, where it says that when Hashem created the world and He created the trees, originally it says it was going to be eitz pri or ser pri, right? And then when it was created, it was an eitz or ser pri. It was meant to be, so to speak, whatever this means. Something went wrong. Right? How we understand that? Obviously, Hashem doesn't make mistakes, but it was meant. The ideal form was meant to be that the tree itself has the same taste as the fruit. And the way that it was created was that it's a tree which does not have the taste of the fruit, and it bears fruit, and that bears that's part of the idea that in this world the way we experience it, there is a process, right? We don't see the end goal as part of that process, but that is the way that it will be latid lavo. In any event, we have certain remnants of that, and as you can see, tiltan is one example, and there are a few other examples as well where you have an eitz and a pri which has the same taste, but in our imperfect reality, that is normally not the case. Okay, so that is one. So that is the Lishna Kama. That is the first way that Abaye says, right? We saw a machloket, Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda and Rabbi, regarding when it becomes teva, regarding shibulim. So Abaye said, no, it's only a machloket regarding shibulim, but it's not a machloket regarding kitniot, in that everybody agrees that already you bring in these bundles, it would already be considered teva. And then we tried to bring a proof from the Mishnah. Okay, maybe or maybe not, so that the proof holds up. But now we say Ika de Amri. We're about a little bit past halfway down the Amri. Ika de Amri. There is another version of this, which is Amar Abaye Machloket b'Shibolin, Aval b'Kitniot v'Rakol Soyata Lo Tivla. Okay, according to this version, we say as follows: Abaye says the Machloket is when it comes to Shibolim. When it comes to Kitniot, these bundles of Kitniot, there is no Machloket. Everybody agrees there that it is Lo Tivla, that it is not Teva. Only that is not considered the final processing of the food, and you would not have to separate the table yet. Okay, so in the first version, the Chiddush was on Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda's opinion. Here the Chiddush is on Rebbe's opinion. Rebbe here is going to be more lenient than he was in the previous case. Okay, so if we say that, why would we say that? Why would Rebbe now say in this case that it is not considered teva? So have a look at Rashi. Rashi says, "Ika da amri amar Abaye machloket b'shibolin, bahanu mechayev Rebbe lefi sharbe konsinotan lemlilot v'klayot shen garnan." Says in the case of grains, so there Rebbe was mechayev you to take truma. He said because that's a lot of people will bring. That's the way they'll eat it. They'll bring in these stalks individually, and they'll eat them, they'll chew on them, they'll roast them, whatever it is, and therefore that's considered goren. Aval b'kitniot stamach nasatan limroach. So when it comes to kitniot, no, that's not. People don't do that. Okay, so maybe again different ways of seeing the reality between the Lishna Kama and the Lishna Batra. The question is, what's the normal way of eating it? Is the normal way of eating it before this whole process is done, and therefore that's considered processed or not, right? That's the difference between them. But yeah, so according to this, we say that the bundles of kitniot is not yet considered tevel. It's only when they're all brought in together, and then you create this right. The Gemara Malacha is done in that way. So before we brought a support for this, according to this version, we're going to challenge it. Again, from the same Mishnah. Obviously, if the Mishnah was a support in one direction, if we're now changing what the Memra was, the Mishnah is not going to be a support, but it's going to be a challenge. So says the Gemara like this, Meitive. So we challenge on this statement of Abaye. Misha yulo chavilei tiltan shel tevel, halei zekotesh mukashev kamazel yesh be'en mafrish al azela ve'eno mafrish al ha'etz. Okay, same Mishnah we saw before. And again, the point is you bring in these bundles and you're already separating tevel. So according to the Lishna Kama, that was no problem. But according to the Lishna Batra, where Abaye says, if you bring in the bundles, it's not yet considered tevel, because that's not the Gemara Melacha. So what do you mean? The Mishnah is telling me you bring in these bundles of tiltan, and now you have to you're separating trumot and masrot. Okay, so it's not yet tevel. So the first question to understand is, what does it mean when we say tevel? The word tevel can mean a number of different things. The Mishnah said, Chavilei tiltan shel tevel. So says Gemara, now, my love, tevel tavul shel truma, i.e., when you say tevel means trumot and masrot have not been separated from the food. So do you mean tevel tavul shel truma, i.e., truma, what's also known as truma gdola, which is separated originally and that's given to the Kohen, right? Is that what you're talking about? Right? My love tevel tavul shel truma. So answers the Gemara, no, lo, tevel tavul shel trumat maser. There is another case, what's called tevel, which is, right, we know we separate tevel, which goes to the Kohen, and then we have to separate maser rishon, which is the first tithe, which goes to the Levi, but then a tenth of maser rishon has to be, of what's given to the Levi has to be separated and given to the Kohen. That's called trumot maser. Okay, so there are two different types of truma. That's why the first truma is called truma gdola, and then I have the trumat maser. So here, where we talk about tevel, you can't talk about tevel because we're saying that it's not the Gemara Melacha, it's not yet considered tevel, but it's saying no. If it's tevel tavul shel trumat maser, in other words, that the Levi. Let's see Rashi. Rashi says, yeah, lo tevel tavul shel. Well, let's go before. He says, my love, but tevel tavul truma. Klomar, My love, Gabe Israel, Karile Tevel, ועדיין לא נקרא לב שם בפה, ומסתם הקרוי טבע וחייב בתרומה, שהיא תחילה לכל המעשרות תכתיב בה ראשית. Surely we're talking about the case where the original truma has not yet been separated, and that's why it's called, that's why it's still called teva regarding Israel. And then he says, no, לא, בטבע תבוא לתרומת מעשה לעולם, אין חבילים גמר מלאכה. These bundles of kitniot, that is not the גמר מלאכה. ואילו גבי ישראל הוא לא היה במקרה טבע. Regarding Israel, it would not yet be called teva. Ela ben Levi kai. We're talking about what happened. There's a Levi involved. Shekadam ve'alach etzel Israel v'natal ma'aser rishon mimeno b'chavilin. Okay, so what happened was the Levi came and he was impatient. Couldn't wait for the whole thing to take place in order. He came and he took his ma'aser already. Now, I haven't yet performed the Gmar Melacha. So these Kidniot are not yet obligated in Truma. But nonetheless, once the Levi comes along and he takes his Maaser, well, he has to separate Trumat Maaser from it. ונתן מעשר ראשון ממנו בחבילין, והואיל וחלל חבילין הללו שם מעשר, since these now we have a chalut shem of מעשר, נעשו תבל אצלו להפריש מהם תרומת מעשר מן המעשר. Now that the Levi's taken it and he's got his מעשר, it's now called מעשר, you have to separate the truma from that. של הלוי להפריש. ובמיתה, right, that's the punishment for eating from teva. וכל תורת truma עלי, the truma kariyeh rachmanin. In other words, Rashi points out that you should know that trumat maser is truma, is the same as truma gdola in that respect. So therefore, where we say teva, this is not a proof that actually this is already called teva in the sense you have to separate truma, but it's if the Levi came and he switched the order and you gave the maaser or he took the maaser, whatever it is, that is now considered teva and you have to separate trumat maaser from that. So again, inside the Gemara, we said Meitive. Misha, you look Havelei Tiltan Shotevel. Haleze Kotesh Machashev Kamazarish Ben Mufushala Zel Raveno Fushala. So we said, my love, Tevel Tavul Shev Truma. Surely this is, bona fide Tevel that no Truma, definitely no Truma Gedolah has been separated, but essentially that it's already entered the category of Tevel where you would be chayav to separate the Truma Gedolah. No. Tevel Tavul Shel Trumat Maser. This is considered Tevel in the sense that they've taken Trumat Maser, and even though originally it wasn't, they've taken Maser, and even though you weren't now Chayav in separating Truma, once it's been called Maser, so now you have to separate Truma from it. There's no choice. Rabbi Abau, Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. Right? Amar Rabbi Abau, Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. מעשר ראשון שקדימו בשיבולין, שמו טוב לו לתרומת מעשר. Right, that's essentially what he says. מעשר ראשון שקדימו בשיבולין. It's still shibulin. It's not yet a dagan. It's not yet the gmar melacha. It's not yet processed in that bundle. It's just in the stalks. Nonetheless, once you take the מעשר ראשון from those stalks, so that becomes teva, and you now have to separate trumat מעשר. Okay, the next question is, well, Kotesh Lamali. Why does it all talk about? Why do you have to crush it up? Why do you have to crush it up and process it in that way? Leimale ki heichi diavuli achi ki heichi diavuli achi ibnalach. Right. If the Mishnah is talking about, again, the Mishnah says when you crush it up and you have to estimate how much was the eitz and how much was the pri, etc., and how much you have to separate. If we're dealing with a case where it's not tevel from Trumat Gdolah, but it's a case where it's tevel from Trumat Maaser, why can't we just say, well, the Levi, he got his bundles and he can give over a bundle. Why does he have to crush it and make it like that? He could say, this is all the question, right? Why doesn't he say to him, the Levi says to the Kohen, the same way that they gave it to me, unprocessed, so I'm also, I'm going to give it to you, unprocessed. Says Rava, no, that doesn't work. There is a knas. Again, all of this happened because you couldn't wait, Mr. Levi. You couldn't wait to get your grains at the proper time when everything had been processed. You went early and you wanted to take it. So now you're gonna have to do the work. You're gonna have to crush it up, and you're gonna have to produce the food in such a way to give it over as your truma. Knas, says Rashi, the last Rashi on the Amud, says al shekdim V'garam la'arim la'avor al divrei Torah. He went early, and he's now caused this whole halachic loophole. He's caused the owner of the grain to go into transgress the proper seder, the proper way of giving all of the trumot and masrot. Shameshaneh seder masrot over belav. There is this, learned that from the psukim. There's a specific way in order to do this, and you've gone and you've changed the order. You've done it in the wrong way. So that is not appropriate. So therefore, there is going to be a knas, and that's what the Gemara continues. It says Tanya namihachi ben Levi shnanu lo shibolin b'masotav. Right, a ben Levi who was given his given early, given his masrot and still in the stalks. So seotan goren, he has to make them into a. He has to make them into a bundle of wheat. Anavim or seotan yain. If it is grapes, so he has to make the wine. Zaitim or seotan shemen, olives. He has to make the oil, and then umafresh alem trumat maaser v'nodan lakohen. And then he can separate the trumat maaser, and he can give that to the kohen. Shekshem shetruma gdola ena nitelet ela min hakohen over the amud, right? Just as just as the Truma Gdola is only really meant to be taken from the Goren, from the Yakev, from when it's actually processed, right? So too, Kach Trumat Maser and Anitelet Ela Min HaGoren Min HaYakev. So that's going to be the same thing for Trumat Maser. Okay, Adkan, we'll stop over there. We're at the top of Amud Bet, and Bezrat Hashem will pick it up from there tomorrow.
Thank you.